Welcome to Quiet Scare, where horror doesn't scream, it whispers. These are real, documented experiences, carefully curated and adapted to keep the facts clear and the atmosphere calm enough for sleep. Please like and subscribe and tap the bell to catch each new episode. No more than 3 ads in the first 15 minutes, then a clean run to the end. Quiet documentary true narration with a literary edge for sophisticated listeners. Sleep well and dream dark. We were supposed to be hunting grasshoppers along the fence at the edge of the field. The campground sat flat against a wide sheet of cut hay, the stalks shaved to a uniform yellow. Warm air moved over my arms. The tent flags tugged at their lines. Pine needles made a low hiss beyond the sights. My mother had told us to stay where she could see our heads from the picnic table. I trailed behind my brother and sister, feeling seed husks work into my socks as we followed the fence posts. My sister lifted a hand to shade her eyes and paused. I glanced up and caught it, a small black object, level with the fence line, moving across the open field. It wasn't high, it wasn't low, it held one height like it was sliding along an invisible rail, steady and indifferent to the breeze that pushed my shirt. It did not rise or dip, it did not speed up or slow down. It showed no wings, no shimmer, no flicker, just a dot, traveling. Birds tilt and spin themselves. They flash their bellies and change shape in the air. This did none of that. The wires in the fence thrummed near my hand where they met the post. My brother lifted the empty jar beside me as if its mouth could measure distance. It was too far for an insect. It was too deliberate for a leaf. The wind rattled the grass and the printed flags, and the object did not nod or correct. It held its line. Heat rolled through my stomach so fast I had to grab the post. The grit bit into my palm and steadied me. The feeling was distinct and physical. A sudden drop and sway under my ribs, like stepping off a curb I hadn't seen. I kept my eyes on the object. I watched its clean, straight movement across the field. It crossed a strip of thistles and stayed level. It crossed the shimmer over the warm hay and did not wobble. My mother came over from the path with a brisk walk. She scanned the air and called it a simple thing. The word she chose didn't cover the silence in the field. A device with rotors would buzz and tilt against the breeze. It would lean and adjust and show its workings. This made no sound. We all listened at the same time. A fly annoyed my ear. The highway hummed in the distance. Nothing came from that line in the air. I stepped off the path into the cut stubble to test the feeling that I could not name. The stems scratched my shins. I wanted the object to blur in the rising heat. It didn't. It went on, clean and level. My mother placed a hand on my shoulder and told me to come back toward the site. Her fingers were cool where sweat had dampened my shirt. My knees felt loose. I walked backward for a few steps to keep it in view, but the ruts in the ground forced me to turn and watch from the side. The object crossed familiar markers without changing. The stump at the field's rim, a slack scarecrow frame, a row of low weeds. It neither approached nor receded in any way I could register. It kept the same speed. It kept the same height. It did not belong to the same moving air that pressed on my face. My stomach rolled again. I blinked and checked the fence post to make sure my eyes were behaving. The wood grain held where my thumb had rubbed it smooth. Nothing else shook or swam. The wrongness sat behind my eyes and did not release. Back in camp, my father worked a blue tarp across the ground and asked what we had seen without looking up. My mother named it in a way that let lunch carry on. She rinsed my wrists under the pump and pushed water up onto the back of my neck. The cool helped, but the pressure under my breastbone stayed a while, then thinned. I tried to fit the object into a category I knew. The word wouldn't accept the way it moved, so I set the label aside for the moment and watched the open field from the shade. My sister nudged ants off the picnic table with a blade of grass. My brother unscrewed the jar lid and screwed it back on without catching anything. The flags flapped, then went slack, then flapped again. My mind put the black dot back in the blank part of the sky and let it slide. Time passed. The shade crawled. By late afternoon, the field turned brighter gold, then dulled. I checked the sightline twice more. and found only birds and distant planes doing what they always do, tipping and climbing, small motions that fit the wind. When the sun dropped and we lit the fire, smoke rose straight and then slid sideways, and then rose again as the air shifted. My father told an old campground story while he worked a stick in the coals. I stayed quiet and followed the smoke with my eyes. Nothing else in the sight needed me. The pressure in my gut faded to a small echo. I lay down that night, listening to nylon hiss as my brother rolled in his bag. The weight of the sleeping pad pressed into my shoulder blades. I let my eyes close and saw the same clean line across the field, as if a rule had been drawn in the air, and the object had matched it. In the morning, the flags hung loose from their lines, and the field looked plain again. We packed. The jar rode empty in my brother's hands. My sister dozed in the car with her mouth open. On the way out, the road lines reached for the bumper and vanished at the same pace we moved. I thought about lids for hard things, words that help you shelve an image. I tried one, then another, and left them in place because we needed to go. The body memory stayed anyway. It returns whenever something holds speed too perfectly in my view. A bus in the far lane, a shadow sliding across a wall. The sensation is specific. I feel my stomach give a small, slow turn. I remember the grit of the fence post and the silent line at the height of my chest, moving in the same air as everything else and not responding to it at all. I travel for work and for myself. I keep a cheap pair of binoculars in the glove box because birds and deer don't care about schedules. I'm not a daredevil. I don't crawl into mines. I stop at pullouts and watch what's already there. It keeps me steady when the rest of life is airports and receipts. This happened near a waste disposal site outside Youngstown, Ohio. Just past dusk. People hear industrial waste and think movie monsters. What I saw didn't glow. It stood at a distance and watched me, and that was worse. I landed early that day and borrowed my aunt's old sedan. The interior smelled like coffee and sunscreen. Offline maps had the site pinned as a local birding oddity, and my relatives, 2 of them, said they sometimes went out there to watch raccoons and foxes along the berms. I asked if I could join before dinner. My aunt said the road ate tires, which I accepted as the price of admission. I have filed expense reports for less reasonable things. I stopped for gas and a bottle of water. The card reader made me verify my zip 3 times like we were building trust from scratch. We reached the access road at dusk. The air was colder than I expected and smelled like wet cardboard. Pine trees on one side, chain link on the other. The waste area sat low behind earthen barriers with posted warnings about heavy equipment and authorized personnel only. We parked on the legal side of a pullout locals used anyway, and walked toward a break in the trees where you could see down into a broad scraped bowl. Puddles reflected a pale stripe of sky. Deer sometimes came to the rim. My aunt said, coyotes worked the far fence. She said we might catch an owl before full dark. We stood with the fence on our right. My aunt kept her hands in her coat and scanned the slope. My uncle leaned on a post and talked about how the city dumped fill there when steel jobs left. We looked like people killing time in a quiet, legal way. I lifted my binoculars. The glass made the world flat and near. On the far side of the bowl, something stood upright. My first thought was person, then no. The posture was human. The shape was not. It was tall, broad, and still, framed by a gap in the pines where the slope rose to the fence line. The head sat wrong on the shoulders. The arms hung long. No reflective vest, no orange cap, no shuffle or tell of a person trying not to shiver, no tool, no dog, no reason to be there in that light. I lowered the binoculars to steady my breathing and confirmed distance with my eyes. My aunt asked, in a low voice, if I had anything on the far ridge. I said yes, and kept the same tone as before. I raised the binoculars again. It had turned toward us. The face didn't carry features the way my brain expects them. I don't have better words without inventing details. I knew one thing. It watched me. Not us. Me. The stare was fixed and hostile. I waited for a blink. Eyes blink. I took one breath, then another. No blink. The slope under it ran clean to the basin. No machines, no workers, no rumble of trucks. Our breath in the air and a light wind through the needles. The distance should have kept us anonymous. Still, I knew it had me. The glass made the stair a tight line from the gap in the trees to my face. My chest felt tight, and my hands were cold on the binoculars. My aunt's tone changed. She said we were leaving now. She didn't explain. She didn't ask. She turned toward the road. That decision gave me my next step. I followed. My uncle set a hand on my shoulder and eased me backward. I walked. I kept the binoculars down and my eyes on the path we'd made coming in. Pine needles softened our steps. The fence wire had a faint vibration in the wind. Halfway to the car, I checked with my eyes only. The gap in the pines was the same. The figure was still there, upright facing us, not moving. No pursuit meant no angle or speed to manage. That felt worse. Motion gives you numbers. Stillness makes you hold your breath for nothing to change. We reached the sedan. The unlocked chirp sounded too bright. I slid into the passenger seat, and the cold upholstery took the heat from my back. My uncle got in and checked over his shoulder. My aunt drove the way you drive a bad road, steady with eyes up, tires on the higher gravel. No sudden turns. Dust hung behind us and then dropped flat across the ruts. No one spoke until we hit the county blacktop with its center line and farm mailboxes. The sky shifted to a gray that means you are out of time. My aunt said she had seen it before, once, years back. She didn't give details. She said she knew that look and would not wait for it to change. That told me enough. The rule for the rest of the night was simple. We would not go back. We ate dinner in the kitchen with the TV volume low. My uncle poured coffee and set it on a saucer. We kept to simple things. How long I'd be in town, whether the car needed oil, who still lived on Market Street. I slept on the couch and kept my coat on a chair near the door, ready to leave fast. It was a house I've visited since I was a kid, and the posture felt wrong. I didn't sleep much. When I drifted off, I woke to a clean doorway in the dim hall. I got up at 3 and checked the locks. The front deadbolt was set. The side bolt was set. The stove clock showed the right time. I wrote the time down on a notepad near the phone and went back to the couch. In the morning, I stepped outside and checked the car. Pine dust clung to the windshield from where we had parked under the trees. The tires had no cuts. The doors had no scrapes. I took the binoculars from the glove box and tested them on a tree. Bark, needles, a small brown bird on a branch. The glass did what it always does. Edges sharpened, movement separated from background. I put them back in the glove box. I didn't return to the site. I go back to places that treat me well. That place did not. The rule now is fixed. I do not observe wildlife near industrial waste. Not from pullouts, not at dusk, not with family, not alone. I keep that rule even when an empty evening tells me nothing will happen. The facts are enough. An elderly relative saw the figure first and gave the order to leave. The figure stood upright at a distance and turned to face us. It held intense hostile eye contact. We left fast. There was no chase and no sound. We reached safety. The result stayed. I believed from that night on that something out there isn't ours to categorize. There are animals I don't know and people I don't see right away. There are places that keep our habits and wait on edges. I don't know what stood on that rim. I have the stare, the flat light, and the older voice that said go. I travel lighter now. I skip sights like that. I keep the binoculars, but I use them where the ground is clean and the edges make sense. It ended for us at distance under a flat sky, with a car that started on the first turn, and I keep the rule because that is what worked. I was just looking for a restroom. The highway ran between a river channel and a set of rail tracks, and the blue rest area sign finally showed up after too many miles. My companion rummaged for a warm sports drink while I watched for the exit, and promised myself a working sink and a door that latched. The night sat low and heavy, not raining, not clearing. freight signal boxes winked back in the headlights. The dash warned me about a quarter tank. I held my speed and tried to keep the lane centered. We were south of Eureka, running the coastal route because it seemed simpler when we left home. It didn't feel simple now. I counted the reflectors on the guardrail to stay calm and kept an eye on the river's dark water stacking up against the bank. The rest area sign gave us 1 mile. My companion asked if I could check the vending machines, so the last place wouldn't be the one that stole her dollar. I said I would. I meant it. I wanted a bathroom with tile, a paper towel, and bright lights. I wanted to stop thinking about miles and gas and the long black strip of road. The bend ahead curved left around a stand of trees, shoulder tight to the river. The tracks pressed in on our side, gravel right up to the asphalt. I lined up for the curve. The guardrail flashed past in clean segments, and then the headlights filled with something that wasn't the road. A massive dark shape moved through the beam in a single steady crossing, close enough to take the lane in one stride. I braked and the belt locked across my chest. The tires thumped a ridge in the asphalt. The thing didn't startle or flinch. It had an oval, flat body with no features for the light to catch, and limbs that stuck out at fixed angles. It was the size of a small car. The surface stayed dark, not a shadow from anything but itself. It stepped off the far shoulder toward the tracks, and the sound arrived with it. Each placement hit with a clean, hollow metallic tap, the kind of strike you hear when a wrench kisses a pipe cap. Not claws, not hooves, not rubber. Tap, then the next. The same interval each time. The rhythm crossed the ballast and moved toward the rest area cut. It did not change. I kept my hands on the wheel and felt my finger press the hazard light. The blinkers started up and washed the road behind us in red. My companion asked what it was, but I only listened while the taps moved away and thinned in the wind from the channel. The night settled back to the river's hiss, and the faint carry of a truck far behind us. I eased the car forward. The rest area turnoff opened on the right and dropped into a small lot lit by orange sodium lamps. 2 low bathroom buildings sat with a vending machine between them. Picnic tables waited under concrete awnings. No other cars. The river ran behind it, close enough to hear. I took a space facing the water and shut off the engine. The absence of engine noise made the vending machine hum louder than it should. We got out. The air off the channel was cold and clean. I walked the short run between the tracks and the lot. The ballast carried marks, a scruff of shallow divots where the rocks had shifted. They were paired like steps, left and right, but spaced too long for a person, and pressed just enough to show a pass, not a stamp. The rail stood quiet. The crossing arm at the far edge was raised. I told my companion to stay by the car. She did. I followed the trail down the slope where the gravel ended, and the lot began. The scrape stopped at the asphalt edge as if the rest of the path had been swept clean. The lot lights didn't carry all the way to the reeds at the river. What lived in that gap stayed there. I held my phone up and took a picture. The screen caught glare in gray. I changed angles and took another. It still looked like gravel. I used the restroom, the latch worked, the tile was chipped, the sink had hot water, the dryer ran loud and weak, so I rubbed my hands under it and pretended it helped. When I came back out, the vending machine's green light blinked at a slow pulse and the river kept its steady pull. I walked the edge of the lot and filmed the scuffed stretch and the rest area sign together for scale. The audio only picked up the machine and the water. No taps. My companion sat in the passenger seat with the door closed. She said the machine kept her dollar, and she asked whether we should call someone. I stood at the hood and looked down the empty lane back to the highway. I weighed out 911 and imagined trying to explain a featureless car-sized oval crossing the road and tapping like metal on metal. I didn't think that would go anywhere. I told her we were not staying. That was the only decision that made sense. We pulled out and followed the river. I left the hazards on for a stretch because blinking lights felt safer, then turned them off when my hands calmed enough to do it. The tracks fell away into marshland. The highway uncurled ahead in low, dark sections. We passed a patrol car in a turnout later, and I didn't slow or wave. I had nothing useful to offer except a description that didn't fit a form. We reached a motel in the next town. The lobby had a bell on the counter and a jar of pins. I asked for 2 beds, signed the receipt, and kept my mouth shut about the rest area. In the room, I scrolled through the pictures and the short video while a cooking show filled the air with clatter. The images showed gray rocks in the corner of a bench. They didn't capture what mattered. I slept in shortcuts and woke ready to listen for the tapping that never arrived. In the morning, I looked up rail alerts and highway logs on my phone. The rail company had no incidents in the night. The highway patrol listed no closures and no hazards for that stretch. I searched for stories about dark shapes on the 101 and found a scatter of posts that didn't match the thing's size or the sound. The vending machine complaints lined up with what we already knew. Nothing official pointed at what crossed our lane and went down toward the water. We drove home inland, fields and 2-lane roads, and a long run without tracks. It took longer, and I told myself it was to see something new, but it was because I didn't want that river channel on my right, or those rails on my left. I left a scuff in the seatbelt where it burned across my shirt during the stop. It's a small, rough place you can find with your thumb. I haven't cut it away. I don't know what it was, I know what it wasn't. It wasn't an elk or a deer. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a tarp or a shadow thrown by another car. It moved with a fixed, certain stride and made that clean metal tapping each time it sat down, and that told me more than anything in the headlights. I keep the video. It shows glare, gravel, a bench, and a slice of orange light. It proves nothing. If I have to stop on a coastal highway at night now, I pick a station with bright interior lights, a cashier, and a floor that shows its mop work. I do not park beside rails. I do not walk toward reeds. When a blue sign says rest area and the tracks run tight to the lot and the river runs behind it, I keep driving until the road opens someplace else. We used to visit my great-grandmother on Sundays and walk the old cemetery on the hill behind her house in Columbus. The grass stood high in the oldest section where stones leaned and dates wore down to dim scratches. My dad stayed near the fence path. My mom favored the newer side by the road. I drifted to the middle where the ground ran uneven, and the names dropped away. I was 6 the first time I heard him. A small voice, flat and steady, carried from a strip of ground with no marker, just hard soil where the mower skipped. I stopped at the bare patch. The tune ran in a simple loop, a few notes repeating. It sounded like the kind of rhyme you give a child to keep them busy. I planted my feet and moved in a slow circle, because the voice held that pace. The ground had a firm center and thin grass. I kept my arms still because that felt respectful. The sun was out. The day smelled like warm dirt and cut weeds. We had to go before the church crowd filled the lot, so I asked for one more round. I took it and then walked back to my parents. We returned the next Sunday, and the Sunday after that, I went straight to the same spot and moved the same way. The boy's tune stayed the same. It didn't swell or fade. It started when I stepped in and stopped when I stepped out. My mom watched me the way you watch a kid near water. My dad waited on the path with his schedule, keeping an eye on lunch. I told him we could still make it. He said lunch would happen either way, and I could choose what I regretted. The third week, I told my great-grandmother about the boy with no stone who sang. She sat under a wool blanket, though the day was warm. She said plenty of people never got a stone. She said some babies were buried quick when the ground finally thawed, and money never caught up. It came out as a plain fact. She said old records in her closet listed plots from before the church put in the new gate. My dad carried a box of brittle papers to the kitchen table. Inside were forms with typed names and penciled numbers, and a map of squares with notes in the margins. My great-grandmother traced a row and found an unlabeled strip where the neat pattern broke. She said that was where the babies went, and where the poor went when there wasn't space and no one to argue. She said Mr. Roos at the parish kept the books and might remember. She knew him from bingo. A week later, she called back. The spot we described lined up with an entry for a boy who died young. The year was hard to read. The note said son with a family name and no stone. She said they used to mark unmarked graves with wooden stakes that rotted. It was practical, not sentimental. We thanked her. At home, my parents agreed we would treat that patch like any grave. No running across it, no stepping on it for fun. I said I wasn't running. I said I moved that way because the boy sang and it kept the air even. My mom nodded and left it there. I kept dancing through that fall. My sneakers squeaked on wet grass. The tune started when I took my place and stopped when I left. I didn't ask why. It felt like a switch or a faucet. The melody carried no words I knew. It was a steady pattern, patient and small. When the wind picked up, the tune sat under it. I didn't tell classmates. I hummed it while brushing my teeth at home until I was told to pick either humming or toothpaste to keep the sink clean. Winter slowed our visits. The ground froze. When we came back, the patch looked flat and dark. I stepped onto it and the singing didn't start right away. I waited and took another step. Then it came again. The same line, as if I had found the exact spot. I turned one slow circle. The cold stung my teeth. I walked off the patch and my feet sank into softer ground. The tune faded with that last step the way a radio drops when you turn a dial. That was the first time I noticed the gap between what I could see and what I stood over, and the heat climbed the back of my neck even in the cold. As I got older, I learned to keep quiet about it. Kids don't get points for naming invisible things. We moved across town. Sundays filled with errands. My great-grandmother died when I turned 10. We packed up her house. The box with cemetery papers went to my parents. I didn't go back to the hill until I could drive, and had a friend who understood why I wanted to check something old that still tugged at me. My friend Kara was the only person I told start to finish. She didn't make jokes. She stood still when you spoke, and it made the words come out clean. When I asked her to come, she checked the weather and picked a clear day. She said she would bring water because I forgot to drink when I got focused. We met by the fence and crossed to the middle where the ground dipped. I walked to the strip with no stones. The grass had filled in, but a thin circle of soil still showed when you scuffed it. I stood in the center and waited for the tune out of habit. Nothing started. Noon sun warmed the back of my neck. A mower rattled on the far side. A bird called from the maple near the road. I pivoted a slow circle, not dancing now, just tracing the path my feet knew. Kara stepped up to the edge of the patch and set her toes on the line. She stayed quiet. Then she said her shoulders burned. She pressed a hand on her collarbone. She said it wasn't the sun. She took a small step forward and said the heat climbed into her throat and pushed. She tested it by stepping back and forward 3 times. The flush rose in her face when she stood in the center. She listed the effects in short lines, the way she would list items for a test. When she stepped out, the heat eased. She put her hands on her knees and waited for her breathing to settle. It wasn't a scene. It was a measured reaction to a strong physical change. I stood on the spot and felt only the brush of grass. No song, no heat. I told her that as a kid I moved here because a boy sang, and that kept me steady. Saying it in my own voice made me feel foolish and clear at once. She said she believed me. She said belief didn't change what happened to her body. We didn't test it again. That felt like a rule we didn't have to write down. We walked back to the car after her color cooled. She reminded me to drink. I did. The bottle tasted like rubber. I felt bigger because someone else had touched what I carried, and smaller because the tune was gone. Years passed. I visited again with my parents. The parish had repaired the fence and posted new hours. We stopped at the office. An older man said the old maps lived in a metal drawer by the copier. He let us look. My mom took a photo of the square that showed the unlabeled strip. The typed notes had faded. The pencil notation stayed dark. The entry for a boy was present with a smudged but readable family name and no stone. My dad traced the distance from the maple to the gravel lane with his finger and matched it to the ground. He liked when paper and dirt aligned. We returned to the patch. I stood in the center and listened. Traffic lifted from Broad Street. A mower rattled in a newer section. Heat on my shoulders came from the sun. I didn't hear the tune and didn't expect to. I held my hand a few inches above the ground, because touching the earth there felt wrong without permission. I said his name under my breath and counted to 10. Then I stepped aside so my mom could stand a moment. My dad stayed by the lane. He doesn't file what he can't prove, but he gives space when it matters. I have not moved in that slow circle since. Doing it now would turn it into a performance I don't want. My line is clean. I was a child who heard a simple song at an unmarked grave and moved to it, because that kept me steady. Family checked what could be checked. The parish records matched the ground. A friend with a sensitivity I don't have stood on that exact spot, and heat and pressure climbed in her chest until she stepped out. None of this turns the voice into something to certify. I don't need it to. When I pass that hill, I sometimes take the long way and park by the fence. I walk to the strip and count my steps. I stand for a minute. I don't ask for anything. I mark the place and leave. The day is ordinary. The ground is firm. The patch sits where it always has, whether anyone remembers its numbers or not. At the car, I lock the door and put the keys in the same pocket. I check the lane for traffic, pull out, and watch the mirror until the hill drops from view. I don't look back after that. That is the rule I keep now. I moved into Evan's place in Tacoma because my sublet fell through and his roommate left. It was meant to be temporary. The house sat near 6th Avenue with a sagging gate, a low living room, and carpet that smelled like coffee. On day 1, Evan mentioned local talk about the place being haunted, and said lights misbehaved, and small items went missing. I told him I'd seen worse, which was true if you count the month I lived next to a man who owned a motorcycle he never rode, only revved at 7 a.m., for reasons unknown. I unpacked what I had and put my keys on the entry shelf. The brass fob on the ring is a flattened tag with a raised 7. I press it with my thumb when I leave a place. It anchors me. By the second morning, the ceiling light blinked twice, then held steady. The lamp by the couch ticked when I touched its switch. I decided the wiring was old. The switch plates were yellowed. If the electrical was original, that house was a storm away from a repair bill. Later, I picked up a used folding table and stopped at the city desk for a cargo tag, because Evan's truck rack sticks past the bed, and the clerk's only pen needed force to produce ink. None of it mattered until Mia brought her son over. It was a clear Saturday. Sun came through the blinds and laid pale bars on the coffee table. Evan sat in his armchair by the window. I took the end of the couch near the lamp with the unreliable switch. Mia stood in the archway with a grocery bag. Her son Josh ran a neat loop from the stairs to the coffee table and back. The house was quiet. Outside, a trash can dragged across concrete and stopped. When I shifted my foot, a soft spot in the floor breathed under the rug. The ceiling light went on, off, on again in 3 crisp beats. Evan met my eyes like this was the thing he had warned me about. I flipped the lamp switch as a test. It turned off, then on. It hummed. I tapped the base out of habit from an old apartment with a loose socket. The room held the same shapes and angles. Nothing else moved. Josh bailed from the 3rd stair and slid a little on his socks. He bumped the wall with both hands and laughed. Then he stopped moving. He fixed his eyes at a point over my shoulder and tilted his head up the way a kid does when tracking a face. He raised his arm and pointed to the air behind me. He asked who the lady was. The quiet changed. I stood and stepped forward, so the couch back and lamp were behind me. I scanned the room from left to right. The low table, the armchair, the archway, the hallway door. Nothing stood there. I looked again to be sure I hadn't skipped a corner. No woman was in the living room. Josh kept his arm out, elbow locked. He held his mouth in a tight line like he was working out a letter, and said the lady was behind me. Evan leaned forward and said he had told me. He had. I had shrugged it off. Mia came in from the kitchen and read our faces. She asked what was wrong. Evan told her that Josh saw a lady. She looked at me, then past me, then at her son. Her breath shortened. She asked him what he saw. He lowered his hand and said it again, softer. He meant me. I took 2 more steps forward and set myself as a line between the archway and the hallway door. If someone had been in the room, I would have seen them cross one of those gaps. I didn't see movement or hear cloth. The light level stayed the same. The ceiling light held, the lamp kept humming. A car door latched outside and faded. Evan talked fast then, because that is what he does when he thinks a fact explains something. He said he had heard things, that the last tenant found her keys in the bathroom sink or in the fruit bowl after setting them on the side table. He said he hadn't wanted to make it a thing with me. He already had made it a thing on day one, but then it was just a word. Now the word sat at my shoulder. I went to the kitchen and poured water from the filter pitcher. The fridge motor came on and steadied. The water level in the glass made a clean circle and did not ripple. I wrapped both hands around the glass and drank. Then I returned to the couch and sat, careful to face the room. We treated the next minutes like a normal visit. Josh climbed into his mother's lap with a bag of small oranges. He peeled one. He lined up the skin in crescents on the table and ate in silence. He glanced at the space behind the couch, then back to the orange. I checked the sightline he'd had by standing where he stood, and raising my eyes to his height. The line cleared my shoulder and hit a square of wall between the lamp and the hallway. The paint was matte and had 2 small nail holes close together where a frame had been. Nothing hung there now. We didn't name anything or argue belief. The kid had pointed and asked a plain question. We had to decide where to put our bodies in a room where a child identified a person we could not see. Nothing dramatic followed that moment. The house held steady. The ceiling light flipped on when I left the room, and off when I came back. The lamp clicked from off to on when no one touched it. The pattern repeated enough to count. I didn't know why. I stopped trying to think past that. I took note and adjusted how I moved. I didn't sit with my back to the blank square of wall. If I had to stand there, I set my shoulder to it instead of my spine. It wasn't a statement. It was a move to manage a feeling. 3 days later, my brass key fob went missing. I had put my keys on the entry shelf the night before. In the morning, the ring was there without the fob. I emptied my bag onto the couch and checked each pocket. I checked the floor in straight lines. I lifted a cushion and ran my palm along the zipper seam. I checked the bathroom, though I had no reason. The sink was dry. Evan watched me loop the rooms and said the house did it. I told him I was tired and careless and had lost it myself. Then I looked again. After lunch, I stood in the living room with a paper plate and stared at the blank square of wall. I wasn't trying to call anything. I just looked at the place where Josh had pointed. The overhead light snapped off. The plate dipped. I touched the switch and turned it back on. The lamp did nothing. I set the plate down and stepped away. The fob turned up that afternoon. Evan lifted the cushion on his armchair to sweep out crumbs and coins, and the brass tag lay centered on the chair base under the sagging foam. It wasn't wedged in the seam. He held it up between 2 fingers and told me to look. The raised 7 caught light. I slid it back onto my ring and covered it with my thumb. I decided to stop using the entry shelf. I got a clean bowl and put it on the kitchen counter where I could see it from the living room. My keys and fob would go in that bowl. If I took them out, they would go in my pocket or the inner sleeve of my backpack. Small rules help when you can't control the larger thing. You pick a point you can hold. In the days after, Evan stopped sleeping in his room. He said the back of the house put him on edge at night, so he took the couch and watched the ceiling until after midnight. He texted Mia that he was documenting what Josh said, not asking her to weigh in. We started listing what happened in plain terms, and the time it happened. That didn't stop the small things. It made them easier to stack. 1 week after the first event, I sat alone in the living room. The ceiling light went off and back on, in a single clean beat. The lamp stayed steady. The air didn't change temperature. No door moved. I didn't speak. I set my phone face down and sat with my back against the arm of the couch so the wall was at my left and not behind me. I waited a minute, then went to the kitchen and checked the bowl. My keys and fob were where I had left them. That night, Evan tightened the bulbs in the ceiling and the lamp with a step stool. He stopped it firm and put the stool away. We didn't tell stories about a woman or try to name her. We didn't explain what Josh saw. We had a sentence from a kid. and a set of small changes to our daily movements. I moved out at the end of the month, carried boxes to my car with Evan, and pressed the brass 7 before I locked the door. Dust hung in the same pale bars on the coffee table. The couch clicked when a box touched it. Nothing punctuated the exit. I still keep my keys in a bowl on the counter, where I can see them from the next room. I still avoid sitting with my back to an empty place if I don't have to, and when I turn on a ceiling light, I watch it for a second before I move on. Grief did strange math in our house. It subtracted a person but left his tools in place. His habits still printed on the yard. A week after my father-in-law died, our room sounded bigger. The corners held air that didn't feel used. I put a fork in the sink and left it there like it might call its own kind home. I went back to the clinic and stood by the copier, weighing whether to shake the toner or file a ticket, and then I went home and watched my son play in the yard because that was where most of our days happened. We live in Greeley, a small rectangle of grass with a freestanding shed at the back fence. The shed had been his territory. He fixed mowers there, sharpened blades, and set coffee cups on a plank by the window. He had rules about his tools. He didn't say them unkindly. He said them like instructions for keeping things working. That first afternoon back, I took Milo outside. He was 5 and moved through the yard like a leaf with a destination. The driveway gate swings inward and snags, unless you lift it. I lifted it. He hauled gravel in a plastic dump truck and made 3 short lines. I sat on the back steps, because sitting there felt like the only thing that did not require a decision. He walked to the shed door and reached up for the handle. His fingers missed by a 1/4 inch. He didn't jump. He didn't get a stool. He looked at the blank space where his grandfather would have been, and set his hand back down. He took 2 steps away from the door, the way kids do when someone steady places a hand on a shoulder. He said his grandfather told him not to go in there. I stood but stayed on the step. The shed was closed. The latch sticks and the padlock hangs where it always hangs. I put my palm on the sun-warmed wood and left a chalk print, and tried the handle because habit runs ahead of thought. It stopped at the latch. I didn't force it. That night, I told myself kids repeat rules with the right rhythm, even when the person who made them is gone. He had heard "not in there" every Saturday. He could say it and go on hauling gravel, so I went on too. The next day, he played by the shed again. He bounced a rubber ball off the siding and it made a clean thock and rolled toward the narrow gap between the shed and the fence. Things that fall there stay out of reach. He trotted after it and then stopped short like he had heard his name said whole. His hand stayed by his sides. He told me his grandfather didn't want him behind the shed. I picked up the ball and crouched to check the gap. A gum wrapper and a dry leaf sat there. The fence picket didn't give when I pulled. I stood and set the ball in his hand. He ran to the elm and made a new line in the dirt with his truck, and told me his grandfather was playing in the yard. He said it like he was reporting the sky. The 3rd day, he set the truck by the shed again and stepped back to that same distance. The truck settled on the slight slope and stopped. The rear bed rose and tipped. No one touched it. A thin line of gravel slid out and rattled to a stop. He clapped once and whispered thanks, and watched that empty spot you cannot photograph. I walked down and put my hand on the truck. The plastic was cold. I lifted the bed and it moved the way it should. I picked up one white piece of gravel. I let it fall into the new line and listened to the small bounce. My stomach tightened. Order had shifted 1 click towards something I couldn't name. I didn't know why any of it happened. I knew what I saw. That night I wrote it down in a cheap spiral notebook from Walgreens and put the notebook in the drawer with the batteries. I used plain words. I read them the next morning, and they stayed plain. Days stretched and the sun traced its path over the elm. Traffic from 10th Street made a steady hush. A neighbor's mower started 2 houses over, and the sound came through the fence. The shed door kept a dark edge where the sun didn't reach. He kept saying his grandfather didn't want him by the sawhorses or at the gap behind the shed. He described it the same way every time, and then he asked for a snack. He didn't build on the story. He didn't add rules. He followed them. I stopped trying to see through his eyes and started watching the ground. He would go to the line where the dirt changed color and stop there, then report that his grandfather was by the fence or in the yard. When he said his grandfather laughed, I knew he meant that short huff when a plan worked, not a big sound. I stood and breathed, and then I sat down. I still worked. I called the clinic and told them I needed long lunches for a week. The office manager said the software might warn me about overtime, and she would fix it on Friday. I joked about the time tracker asking if I was still working every 6 minutes. Then we hung up and I went back outside. The gate creaked when I moved it. The trash can lid did its usual drop. I let it drop. By the end of that week, I saw a pattern. He set the truck by the shed and stepped back. The bed tipped and the gravel slid the same way every time. The back door swelled in the heat and stuck, unless I propped it with my foot, so I propped it. A breeze moved through. The door pressed inward and then eased out again. The driveway gate swung and touched the trash can, and the lid lifted and settled. Nothing slammed. Nothing rushed. It was all ordinary movement inside a boundary I didn't make, but started to honor. I made one small change in the yard. I set a rubber wedge on the ground by the shed threshold, not touching the door. It had a loop for a finger and a simple shape. It was a marker that said I saw the rule and would keep it without trying to add one of my own. After that, I stopped going to the latch. I let my fingerprints fade. I kept my distance the way my son did. I took pictures of the yard to see if anything else showed. They look like our yard. Sunlight, dirt, a boy with a truck. No extra hand, no shadow out of place. I had not expected the pictures to hold more than that, but I still checked them, and then I put my phone away and watched my son stop at the line. He slept through the nights. He didn't wake with new stories. He ate breakfast and went outside and set the truck down and looked at the space by the shed, as if there were a person there doing what he had always done, which was make sure people did not get hurt around sharp things. The rule held. I kept it. He kept it. The yard stayed itself. I kept writing in the Walgreens notebook. Dates, plain words. If I did not have a new line to add, I wrote yard same. The notebook stayed with the batteries because that is where paper ends up in our kitchen. I didn't build a case. I didn't invent reasons. I kept a record because it kept my breathing even. By the second week, the comfort came in small pieces. Opening the gate with a steady lift. Hearing the thwack of a rubber ball against siding. Watching a line of gravel form beside a shed door I did not open. My father-in-law's rules still functioned in the yard, delivered by my child's quiet reports and a few simple movements I could not account for. I accepted the shape of it because accepting it meant I could sit on the back step and not expect something else to break. I don't open the shed now. That is the limit I keep. We play under the elm and sweep the step and pick up the ball when it rolls toward the gap. I note where my son stops. I watch the gravel slide into its line. When the wind picks up, the rubber wedge by the threshold stays exactly where I set it. The rule holds. The day moves across the yard, and I let it move over us. I first noticed the pattern in the hallway's light. My son had started pointing to the bathroom doorway at night. Not to the room itself, but to the narrow seam where the jamb cut a line between the nightlight's weak amber and the dark beyond. He called it the line. He said someone stood there facing in. I walked the hall, checked the towels and the robe on the hook, flattened the coats, and looked for the cat. The cat was asleep on the couch, one paw over her eyes. The doorway looked clear in full light. When I switched the light off, the seam turned back into a clean edge and nothing more. He stayed certain. I did not tell him to stop. I have always been the kind of person who pays attention to things like this, then tests them until there is nothing left to test. The second night he reported the same thing. He was calm and precise. The person was in the line. No movement. Just there. On the third night he added a constraint. It wasn't the cat, because the cat's tail would move. By the fourth, he ran through his list on his own. It wasn't laundry or a hanging towel, because the shapes were wrong. It wasn't the plan in the kitchen, because the kitchen is down the hall. It wasn't his father, because his father carries a bright phone and laughs on his way past. It wasn't a dream because he looked twice and the shape stayed. He used plain rules, and each rule removed a cause. I began to structure our evenings around the checks. After teeth and books, we tied back the bathroom towel and took down the robe. I moved the laundry basket into our room. I smoothed the coat sleeves and closed the closet. We confirmed the cat's bell was in the living room and shut the bedroom door so the cat could not slip by and confuse us. Then I turned on the hall light and left it on. In that brightness, the scene looked like paint and wood, nothing else. He repeated his rule. The person did not show in the light, only at night in the line. The report did not read as fear. It read as record keeping. He watched the scene between 9 and 11. When I entered, he told me whether the person was there. He said yes every time. I listened to the small house noises while he spoke. The heater cycled, the refrigerator clicked. A glass upstairs settled on the nightstand. Outside, October air pushed through the window frame and cooled the room. He kept one hand on mine and kept his eyes on the doorway. We made the test list shorter each night. The answers did not change. I told my husband. He was kind about it without needing to be convinced. He called the hallway creepy and said kids see shapes. He stood with us once and waited in the dark. His laugh did not come when it usually does. He rubbed his arms and told our son it was late. When he leaned down to say goodnight, he held on for an extra beat. He did not name what he saw or didn't see. Neither did I. On the night I finally saw what my son was seeing, I stayed on the floor beside his bed after the last book. I watched the doorway without blinking until my eyes watered. Then I softened my focus. The nightlight covered the hall with an amber oval. The bathroom behind it was a solid block of dark. The thin seam between them wasn't empty. It carried a slight disturbance, the way air over hot pavement shifts what you think you're looking at. It was aligned exactly with the jamb. It wasn't an object and it wasn't a shadow. The edge held a vertical presence that matched the house's vertical. Humanoid is the closest word I have. Height and edges where nothing should have been outlined. I marked it quietly. I did not stand up or step closer. I did not call out. The temperature didn't drop. The light didn't flicker. The house did not do anything new. The line held, and in that line there was an occupancy. I accepted that my son's list had been accurate. It was not the cat or the towel or the robe or a coat or a plant or a person we knew. It was not a dream. It was there when looked at twice. The next week, I removed the rest of the easy suspects and stopped inventing new ones. We had accounted for hanging fabric and moving animals and stray lights. We had checked angles from the floor and halfway down the stairs and from the bedroom doorway. The shape did not show when the light was on. It returned when the light was off, and the house settled into its night pattern. My son went to sleep with the scene in view. I sat by him and watched without announcing anything. That became the new routine. I started to set small rules for myself. I would not ask it to move. I would not name it. I would not assign it a purpose. I would not let my son talk himself out of his own observations to make me comfortable. I would treat the scene like a posted boundary. If it stayed in the boundary, we would stay in ours. On a Wednesday, I asked my husband to take the spot. He stood in the hall at 10 and crossed his arms. We turned off the light. The nightlight gave us the same shape of dark and amber. He watched for a full minute. He didn't claim a conclusion. He said nothing, then went back to brush his teeth. That was enough for me. We kept our greeting quiet. On the way to bed, I touched the jamb with 2 fingers, the way you steady yourself in a narrow pass. I told the line good night in a voice I would not use anywhere else. My son did the same with his palm against the paint. He marked that he saw it, then rolled to face the wall and went to sleep. On the last wet night, rain filled in the background and did not stop. The boards in the house took on the damp and clicked as they adjusted. A cool draft slid under the bathroom door. The cat jumped onto the bed and settled heavy at our feet. My husband hummed out of tune while he finished in the bathroom with the door half open. I asked my son if the person was in the line. He looked and said yes. We watched together. The scene held the same disturbance. I told the line it could finish whatever it was going to do. I did not know what that meant. I did not need to. The disturbance eased. The seam returned to a clean edge. The bathroom doorway lay flat again. The night did not change in any other way. The cat stretched and went still. After that, my son still checked out of habit. He looked at the line and shook his head. He said not tonight or simply no. The scene stayed a scene. We did not make a story to hand around. We kept the facts as they were. He had reported a figure repeatedly in the same place at the same time of night. We had eliminated ordinary sources. I had seen a presence aligned to the jam. It had stayed at the boundary, and then it had gone, and our house had returned to its usual shape. Weeks later, he asked me what the place between the room and the hall is called. I told him threshold. I added the word liminal. He said the word once, then tucked the blanket under his chin. He closed his eyes without turning to watch the doorway. I still touch the jam with 2 fingers when I pass, a small mark of respect for a line that held steady until it did not. The wood is cool under my hand at night, and the paint is smooth and the edge is plain. The first changes were small. A hinge, a baseboard, a strip of wall I sanded after dinner. Week by week, our narrow townhouse got tighter and cleaner. The hallway painted and the fixtures leveled. The air ran cooler along the floorboards at night. I have a history of hard dreams. But as the rooms came together, the dreams grew specific. I woke with my jaw tight and the memory of teeth. On a Tuesday, after the last coat dried, the attack started. At 2:11 a.m., impact sounded inside my closet. The rod flexed. Blankets pitched forward, and a cedar sachet line hung in a tight braid. My tongue tasted copper where I had bitten it. I checked the hinges, checked the floor, felt a faint vibration in my toes. From the hallway, my roommate moved and the hallway light clicked. I said it was the house settling. I did not believe it. We tried ordinary reasons. A joist, air pressure, traffic at night. Then objects started vanishing and reappearing. The TV remote rested on the bathroom faucet. A shoe turned up in the freezer. A ring showed up inside a cereal box. We looked at each other and started a list. It was a short list that got longer. We put up a run of frames on the stair wall. 15 in a line. Thrift and family, with adhesive hooks rated far beyond their weight. I purchased a cheap motion sensor and aimed a phone at the stairwell. The first night showed drafts with the windows shut and a light flicker we could not reproduce. On the 4th night, the camera recorded a shape on the top landing. It was low and fast, thicker than the dark behind it. The path ran left to right across the field and out of frame. We replayed it and froze a still. The detail broke into grain, but the outline read shoulder and a notch where a neck would sit. We moved to the kitchen, set the phone on the table between a salt shaker and a half-eaten pizza slice, and looked at what we had. The temperature in the hall dropped, and the hairs rose on my arms. After the photograph, the pattern changed. Our pets refused the stairs. The dog planted his paws and whined at a pitch that made him shake. The cat fixed on a point halfway up the run, and held his eyes wide until he trembled. We slept in the living room with the phone face down. At 3:33 a.m., every frame on the stair wall fell at the same time. Glass hit wood, 15 impacts in one blow. The frames did not slide off their hooks. Most launched outward and landed in a broken scatter. I froze at the baseboard and watched the dog's hackles rise. The cat's tail fluffed, but he stayed planted. Their eyes tracked a point that moved down toward us, then paused. I counted breaths to 6 and did not step up. In the morning, my car keys were behind cans in the pantry. My toothbrush sat bristles down on the washing machine. The printed still from the video had a crease vertical through the neck notch. The dreams turned violent and instructional. I woke knowing how to lift a door off pins, which stair squeaked in the middle of the night, how to move a frame without rattling glass. I had not learned those things by choice. We asked for help from a relative who was steady and practical. She arrived, walked the house, and made no claims. She put blue painter's tape on the floor and 3 narrow lines at the threshold to the stairs. She said names or agreements and not to make one. She watched the clip, turned the screen face down, and told me I had given it a handle by trying to pin it down. She did not offer a purge. She said to change the paths instead. We broke the neat lines we had just created. We shifted rugs so edges did not align. We moved the couch at an angle that looked wrong, and forced a bend in the route from room to room. We suspended a piece of fabric across the landing, and took the frames down. We put the printed still in a drawer and shut the drawer. For 3 nights the house was quiet. I slept through without images. The dog climbed 2 stairs and looked around and came back down calm. The cat groomed mid-stair with his eyes half closed. On the 4th night, a sneeze sounded from the empty 2nd floor. It was a wet, human-seeming sneeze from a space with no one in it. The dog hid under the table. The cat flicked an ear and gave me a look like a complaint. We moved out 2 months later. A condo across town with right angles and street noise. The first nights were steady. The dog ran up and down the short stair. The cat found a window seat and tracked buses. Nothing shifted that we hadn't moved. Then the dreams returned on schedule. The layout changed, but the instruction pressure stayed. I woke with my hands set in positions I did not remember choosing. My face looked newly cried without tears. I waked the next afternoon. My keys lay by the bedroom closet instead of on the kitchen counter where I had left them. I stood still and listened. The air read interested, the way a room feels when a TV is on mute. I called my relative. She said the image in my head could act like a handle. She taught me a simple habit. At night, before sleep, I counted breaths and named borders out loud. In the morning, I touched the wall and breathed to 7. I stopped checking the old clip and left the printed still in its drawer. I moved the couch daily by an inch, then half an inch, so the routes through the condo never stayed fixed. The activity slowed. It did not stop. Cabinets stood open by 2 inches at breakfast. A knock ran along the ceiling where no pipes were. The pets paused on the stair, stared, then broke and headed for the water bowl. I did not take new pictures. Years and a move later, we rented the top floors of a big house at the edge of a park. Sunlight showed dust in the air. Steps creaked in predictable spots. My cousin took the lower unit. The staircase was ours to use, not ours to own. I adjusted to living with a thing I did not name. I walked like I carried water. I kept dreaming. The staircase in the dream gained detail. Splinters caught my skin. The banister warmed under my palm. I knew the sound frames make when they hit wood and glass, even while asleep. My brother visited and took the couch. He does not keep room for this kind of story. We let him sleep without a briefing. At 2:48 a.m., a sneeze sounded from the laundry room downstairs. It was loud and wet, the air pressure shifting a touch in the hallway. He sat up and called my name. I stepped out and we met on the landing and stood still. The house held quiet. Something below shifted weight on a surface. My brother stopped making jokes after that. He kept his keys in his pocket the rest of the trip. We kept up the changes on purpose. When a repair came due, we did it unevenly. 2 boards replaced, 1 left as is. A patch of paint left slightly off shade, not from neglect but to break a line. We boarded a crawl space we could have used, and hung a single frame halfway up with nothing in it, no glass, a blank rectangle that occupied space and did not offer an image. For months it stayed quiet. The dog napped on the mid-stair, the cat slept on the landing. My dreams broke into unrelated scenes with no lessons to carry forward. We hosted dinners. We kept the photo sealed away in a drawer in a box. A year and a half in, the pattern returned. A teaspoon appeared set square on a windowsill. A clean arc of salt lay across the 3rd step with no container in sight. The collar of my coat hung inside out with every edge flat and straight, as if placed with care. The pets froze on the stairs and tracked the same invisible point halfway up. That night, I dreamed a clear instruction on catching a falling frame without a cut. I woke and decided not to keep it. I breathed, named borders, and put the lesson in the same inner drawer as the photo. In the hall, a small sound answered that choice. The sound people make when a plan fails. A sneeze followed. I did not respond. We never found a single act that ended it. We did not burn the photo or bless the staircase and watch the effect travel like water through the frame. We moved again, when work or money demanded. and found the pattern would test the new paths and our old habits held. The things that stopped it for stretches were plain changes to the way space connected, and strict attention to where my attention went. I learned not to turn disturbance into an exhibit. I kept the pets on routines that avoided pauses on the exact stair where they tended to lock up. I told family and friends only what they needed to keep themselves safe in our rooms. Sometimes the frames stay up for years. Sometimes a set of frames anywhere in the house falls in 1 minute. Sometimes a spoon is waiting in the exact spot where you need it. I take it and keep my mouth closed. People ask whether I regret the picture. I say the disturbance existed before the camera. The camera turned it into a story I had to keep carrying. They ask if it belongs to a house. I say we changed houses and it stayed with me. They ask if it means harm. I say it punishes attention and escalates with control. It teaches and expects you to pretend you learned it alone. Each time we broke a corridor, the activity stopped long enough to sleep. If you ever hear a sneeze from an empty stairwell, close the drawer that holds your pictures. Count your breaths. Move the couch an inch so the room runs a different line. Hang your frame slightly crooked and leave the glass off 1. Then sit in the new angle and wait. Live in it. And let the stairs be stairs again, for as long as they will be. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was 17, on a budget hostel bunk with a bus schedule in my pocket, and a notebook full of burial customs I thought would impress my cultural studies teacher. Bear Ridge Cemetery sat above town with closed at dusk on the listing. My bus let me off in mid-afternoon. Dusk felt far away and I told myself I'd be fast. Teen logic turns a posted rule into a suggestion you can outwalk. The gravel road climbed through old pines to a wooden gate with a green chain. The chain was clipped but loose enough to skirt. A sign said no entry after dusk. I checked my phone and saw plenty of time. I decided I was documenting a place, not trespassing. I've written worse justifications on field trip forms. No other visitors stood on the road. Wind moved in the timbers. Thin tongues of snow stayed in the shade along the fence. The graves ran in low stones. Some names were rubbed to pale troughs. A few plots had tidy piles of river rock and cloth ribbons tied to branches. I kept my steps on the bare dirt track between the plots. I believed that counted as respectful. I wrote dates in my notebook until my hand shook from cold, and I had to stop to warm it in my pocket. I took one photo. It came out crooked. My gloves were in my pack. My fingers burned and then went numb. I made a mental note to buy better gloves, like that would fix anything that mattered here. A row of fir trees marked the northern edge. Past them the slope dropped and the mountains opened. There was no one to say turn back, so I followed the narrower path. Needles were packed into a strip where others had walked. I told myself I'd go until a good landmark, then reverse it. In my head, the green gate waited close behind. My mom had asked for a remote selfie anytime I went off pavement, which she defines as anything with fewer than 3 coffee shops. Bear Ridge counted. I put the selfie off because my face was red and watery-eyed, and I didn't want to send that. Vanity is a reliable delay tactic. The burial ground proper rose on a low shoulder. The layout changed there. The stones were smaller, some just field rock with tool marks. A waist-high wooden rail framed a rectangle of lighter earth. I did not cross it. I tracked the line with my eyes and stayed on the path outside the rail. The air shifted without wind. The light went wrong in a single step. It didn't dim by degrees. It thickened to a deep flat yellow that made everything look aged. The sky showed no storm. My phone screen turned the same tint. I blinked and nothing changed. At the edges of my vision, figures moved where no one stood before. Not solid bodies. Human-shaped shadows that pushed in and out like heat ripples. Their edges swelled and thinned. Every time I turned to fix one, it slid deeper into the margin. My breath came up white. The temperature fell very fast and bit my hands. I zipped my jacket and pulled up my hood. The zipper teeth slipped, and I had to press them together with numb fingers. I called that my line. No more jokes after that. The yellow deepened to late-day color. I checked the time to reset myself. 3:41 p.m. That matched my sense of it. I took 2 careful steps, and the shadow shape stayed at the periphery in both directions, present when I moved and less apparent when I froze. I stood still for a count and listened. Wind rubbed wood. The figures held position just out of direct sight, human height and width, consistent in shape if not in detail. I held a hand up to block one edge, lowered it, and found the opposite edge bulging again. I did not call it a vision. I described it to myself as a moving gap, where a person would be if a person were there. I told myself the light shift could be forest dust or angle. I told myself the temperature drop could be shade. I told myself the human outlines were artifacts. I picked the ordinary explanation so I could backtrack with a plan. I kept the rail to my right and turned around, matching landmarks. The ground showed one fresh animal print, an oval with 2 clear nails, and then nothing else for it to connect to. That small piece of clean detail helped me move. The yellow did not lift. I took a 10-second video as I panned from the lighter rectangle to the trees and then the sky. The clip showed normal daylight. My eyes kept the yellow. I watched the clip again and saw only wind in the microphone and my hand steadying the phone. I counted 20 steps to the first row of named stones. My hands ached like I was gripping ice blocks. The cold pushed hard through my coat. My pack strap shifted against my shoulders as if the weight had changed position with no hand on it. I told myself it was wind on loose webbing. I took a deep breath, and it stung. I kept moving and reversed each small marker I remembered. A dead limb had punched a gap in the fence, and I stepped around it in the opposite direction. The gate should have been close. It sat at a bend where dirt met gravel. I lifted my phone. 3:58 p.m. If I reached the highway soon, I could make the bus back to town. I pictured the lit front of the grocery on Main and the gust of warm air at the door. I reached a fence line at a different distance than before. The boards were not where I expected them. I stopped. The shadow shapes filled the edges in a slow roll. I walked left along the fence, and then back right. The gate did not show. My map placed me inside a green blob labeled Bear Ridge Cemetery. The yellow stayed fixed over the ground. I called the hostel to say I'd be late. The call failed. I lifted the phone higher and lost battery without any gain in bars. The ground eased into a shallow dip, and the cold tightened under my coat, down in the space around my ribs. I increased my pace and kept my head level to hold bearings. The figures stayed in the margins and adjusted line with me when I changed direction. If I swung my gaze fast, the far edge in the opposite direction bulged for a moment, wide and then narrow. I noted the effect and went straight again. The gate appeared in one normal step. I saw fence, then green paint, and the loose chain. There was no let-up. The yellow stayed. A man stood outside the gate. I had missed him until I got close because I had locked on the paint. He was older, narrow-faced, in a dark jacket and a knit cap and practical boots. Keys hung from his belt clip. He looked at me with no surprise. He asked if I was all right and told me the place was closed and had been for hours. He said the county and the tribe asked people to respect the site and keep out after hours. He said it in a level way, like a practice rule that covers every argument. I told him I had come after lunch. I checked my phone and saw 9:26 p.m. I did not assign him a title. He lived there or worked the ridge and carried the keys. He stepped back so I could slip around the chain. Up close, his cheeks were reddened from cold, and he smelled faintly of cedar smoke. He said we should get down off the hill before I lost more heat. He did not offer an explanation for the time. He didn't need one to move me along. We walked the gravel road toward the highway. He spoke very little. He said to watch the time when I visit places like that, and not to wander into them at the edges of the day. He delivered it as a straightforward rule. I took it as one. As we lost elevation, the color eased in steps. The sky returned to a blue-gray, and the trees lost the stain. The cold stayed a while and then slackened with no clear trigger. The shadow shapes thinned at the corners of my vision, and then were gone, with no last move. We reached the highway. A pickup passed with headlights on. Streetlights switched on down the hill. These cues matched the clock on my phone. It read 9:51 p.m. He stood with me at the pullout while I checked the bus schedule. The next one had already come and gone. He pointed toward town and said a coffee place kept its lights on late. He did not offer a ride. He had done enough. He returned up the road without looking back, and I watched the dark ribbon of gravel swallow the beam of his headlamp when he turned a bend. I walked to the coffee shop and warmed my hands under the bathroom dryer until I got feeling back in my fingers. The mirror showed windburn across my nose and eyes that looked like I'd stayed up all night. I bought a tea and sat under a framed county map. I replayed the 10-second clip from the ridge. The video showed daylight in a steady pan. No peripheral figures. Wind on the mic, the scratch of my jacket. I sent my mom the late selfie I owed her. The fluorescent lights gave me a washed-out look, but the obligation was the point. I texted that I had missed a bus and would catch the last one. Her reply came right away. The normal tone of that small exchange felt out of scale with what the hours had done on the ridge. I filed that as another fact of the day and left it alone. I slept lightly at the hostel and woke twice to check my lock screen. It kept steady time overnight. In the morning, I wrote a plain line in my notebook. I entered a culturally significant burial ground near dusk. The light shifted to deep yellow. Human-shaped shadows stayed in my peripheral vision. My sense of time did not match the clock, and my phone showed a loss of hours. A resident met me at the gate, confirmed the closure, and walked me down. I kept the phrasing dry so I wouldn't argue with it later. I don't go back up there. Where I do go, I keep to posted hours. I check the sun with my eyes as well as my phone. I do not step past chains, loose or not. I do not walk into places that say keep out after hours, even for a quick look. That is my boundary now, and it fits in a sentence. I don't know why the light changed or why the time went that way. I know a man with a keyring met me at a fence and told me it was night, and the bus came when the schedule said it would, and I leave the account there. We picked the cabin because it was cheap, close to the river and tucked away from people. I wanted a quiet week with my family. I wanted the kids to throw rocks and come back with wet shoes. The gravel turnoff sat past a sun-faded plywood sign that once advertised bait. The place had a bent metal gate, a short fence, and one security light that hummed as it warmed. The river hissed through willow and grass. It looked simple and workable. I liked workable. I told myself this was a break from over-planning. The grocery list still outgrew the itinerary. The cooler stayed wedged like a third child. I even found a folded county map under the floor mat, which made me feel prepared in a way my phone never does. My only rule was plain: keep the kids in sight and the food sealed. In my experience, a raccoon can open anything you are proud of closing. By sundown, I had the gate swung open and the car nose deep in the yard. The cabin air smelled like dust and old coffee. We unpacked fast. The kids gathered sticks. My mother tested the windows and said 2 didn't close right. I said they were fine and meant I didn't want to fix anything on day 1. Aaron stood on the porch and watched the tree line. I took that as enjoying the view and not cataloging risk. We did an early store run at the highway turnout because the ice in the cooler was a suggestion, not a fact. The clerk had Sam stitched on his shirt and counted change like he was donating it. He said a bear turned a dumpster by the bridge 2 nights back and told us to bring in the trash and keep the gate shut. I nodded, added bear-proofing to my mental list after stopover packing, and bought 2 cans of bug spray for optimism's sake. The light dropped hard. The river sounded bigger. I shut the gate and looped the rusty chain. It scraped like a file. We ate late on one skillet with chipped bowls. Erin pushed food around, then set her plate down. She said she needed to tell me something, and had not because she didn't want it to set the tone. 2 nights earlier, she had a dream. She saw our car at a gate. She listed snakes, a bear, wolves, and me fighting something. She said she saw death nearby like it was part of the scene. She had kept it to herself because we needed a vacation, and because saying it made it feel like a plan. I went for plain rules instead of odds. Keep food inside. Stay out of the dark. Keep the kids close. She nodded. The porch light ticked as it cooled. She nodded. The porch light ticked as it cooled. The first sound blended into the river at the start. It wasn't brush breaking. It was a slow, heavy pattern of steps running a circle around the yard. Not running, not shy. The floorboards took it before our ears did. The kids looked up and went still. My mother said the word elk under her breath. I wanted elk to be true. Then a growl rolled in and held. Proximity has its own pressure. The growl stayed low and traveled along the fence like it knew the line. It paused at the gate. It expelled air. I checked the front door lock. It clicked, but the door frame had a twist and didn't sit tight. The click helped with nothing but habit. We held still. The steps started again and made another slow ring. Aaron and I worked the windows. The back left sash would not settle. I put my palm against it and forced it down until it thumped into the swollen frame. My mother whispered that she could hear it breathing through the walls. I said she could not. Saying it added structure. It did not change the facts. The chain at the gate gave one clean clink and then stopped. The pull to verify the latch hit me like a task I could finish. Erin looked at me and shook her head. The steps came again. The second growl carried longer and closer. The kids cried into my shirt with short-locked breaths. I told them we were fine and held the doorframe with my hand because I needed to hold something that stayed put. The steps paused at the gate again. I moved to the mudroom and opened the inner door. Cold, wet river air pressed against my face. A warped pane in the outer door gave me the yard. The porch light cut a line to the gate. The chain hung loose. I didn't measure my earlier mistake. I stepped out. I went 3 paces to the gate and lifted the chain. The quiet had a narrow feel. I put the link through the loop and pulled it tight. The metal squealed. Brush to my left bent, and an animal moved out of cover. I got impression and heat instead of detail. It was large and direct. It moved straight at the weak spot in the fence. I put my body between the open space and the yard. I raised my arms and spread to fill the gap. It hit a soft board with a shoulder and bowed the wood. I snapped the chain into the catch. My hand shook and I had to aim twice. I said go to no one, because no one else was out there. The animal threw weight against the gate once. The hinges stayed on. The post flexed and then settled. It huffed. I kept the chain in my grip like that contact mattered. The light flickered, then held. The animal turned and walked the fence line. It took the far corner and kept moving. I backed to the door and closed it with my foot. I stood in the small space and listened to it make one more slow pass. The steps faded toward the trees. We did not sleep. The river stayed steady. When the kids lay down on the old sofa, I checked my son's forehead. His skin burned. He looked through me and then stopped responding. His chest rose on time. His eyes didn't track. The heat read like a stove on my palm. I pulled the travel thermometer from the kit. It blinked high. Then error. I tried again and got the same. I gave water and got no swallow. Aaron said we needed to go now. My mother said night roads had their own hazards and we should wait until first light. The steps made one more distant sweep past the corner and dropped out. The river kept its level. We held our place while our son did not come back to us. Near dawn, Aaron said we were leaving. There was no debate. We moved on that line. I told my mother to put the dry food in the bin. I told our daughter to keep the keys in her hand and step in close. I lifted our son and felt the heat through my shirt. He was dead weight but breathing. I opened the door. The yard looked flat and gray. The chain still sat on the gate. We loaded fast. I started the car. The idle sounded too big. I drove to the gate, stopped, unhooked the chain, swung the gate open, and rolled through. I stepped out and closed it behind us. Habit held my hands. I felt wrong air in the back seat as I sat again. It had a temperature shift and a weight that did not belong. On the floor mat by my son's shoes lay a small patterned snake. It flicked its tongue once. I did not know its species, only that it did not belong here. I set the brake. Aaron held our son and stayed silent. My mother made one sound and went quiet. I took the snow brush from under the seat. I slipped the bristles under the snake and kept a steady pressure. I guided it down to the gravel and away from the tire. It moved into grass. I closed the door. I put the brush back in its place so my hands had something normal to do. We pulled onto the road. The cabin dropped behind the trees. My son gasped and blinked, then focused. He said he was cold. I put my hand on his forehead. The fever had crashed to normal. The thermometer read 99, then 98. He took water and swallowed. He slept for real. We didn't stop until town. We parked in a lit lot on Fairview, where other cars sat with their windows down. Aaron checked our son's name and age like a short test, and he answered as if bored, and asked for hash browns. I bought them and a coffee I didn't need, because standing inside a bright place helped. At urgent care on State Street, a physician's assistant checked his ears, throat, chest, and reflexes. He took our account in brief pieces and wrote notes I could not read. He said the fever had broken. He said some kids spike and drop quickly. He did not connect it to the turnout of the yard. Neither did we. We were too tired to turn the facts into a shape. Back at the rental, Erin told me the full dream. She had seen the gate, a snake on a car floor, a bear in a yard, and something large that took space in a room. She said she kept it to herself to avoid giving it a path. Hearing it after the fact felt like filing rather than warning. We stayed in town the rest of the week. We picked places with other people and trash cans with tight lids. We slept where doors clicked and windows stayed where you left them. The kids threw rocks at a park where the bank is paved and the river runs under a bridge with steady traffic. We did not go back to the cabin. I wrote the owner about the gate posts and the sticky windows. I left out the circling and the growl and the fever and the snake in the car. I keep those in a separate list that does not fit a maintenance form. 3 days after we got home, Aaron woke and said the dream replayed. The gate, the snake, the bear, the heavy steps, and me at the chain. I told her I still heard the clean metal clink in my head. She asked what I did at the last second before the hit. I said I pulled the chain through and made that small sound. She nodded and went quiet. We don't camp on that stretch of river anymore. If the kids ask why, I say we like the lake better. At gates, I test the chain twice, then once more. I check the back seat floor before we pull away from any place that feels off. My son runs hot with colds and bounces back. He remembers that night as a schedule and 2 breakfasts. I keep the order clear in my head. The circling steps, the growl, the gate, the chain in my hand, the heat in his skin, the snake on the mat, the turn to the road, the breath he took, and the light on the highway as we left. We went into the trees behind the trailer park because that's where we always went when we were 12 and bored. The strip of wood sat between our row of single wides and the drainage creek behind the old food city in Knoxville. It was late, past the time my mom said come inside. I watched the kitchen window across the lot as we cut down the gravel and into the dark. If she leaned out and yelled, I would claim I didn't hear her. The cicadas helped cover me. I carried a flashlight I borrowed from the maintenance shed because the one in our kitchen drawer was dead again. The maintenance guy never labeled anything, which is probably why the hand soap looked like floor stripper for 2 months. We weren't doing anything special. No dares, no ghost stories, just 4 kids with sticks for swords, and a path we knew by heart. The path ran from the back of Lot 18 down to the creek, and along a chain-link fence. At night, the glow from Broadway pushed through the pines and laid a flat wash on the trunks. Everything looked close. I made a joke that if we found a wallet, I would take the cash and donate the rest. It got a laugh because I still owed Mason $5 from the snack bar last summer. He said installments in Doritos were acceptable. We kicked a beer can and let it clatter ahead like a marker. The air held that wet green smell you get when the heat sits still. Bugs hit my face and hair. I heard the creek before I saw it, water moving over rocks. We followed the deer track on the slope, stepping over roots where the dirt pinched tight between the fence and a big oak. The fence was the boundary. Past it was the loading dock. On our side, just us. We stopped at the flat spot where we sometimes built a pallet fort. The fort was gone, probably hauled off by somebody's uncle. I ran the light across the weeds out of habit. My thumb squeaked on the rubber switch. We weren't hushing each other or showing off. It was another night we would sneak back and pretend we hadn't. I swung the beam toward the thicker trees past the flat. The light caught a shape standing beyond the oak. Not a stump, not one of us. A person shape. Taller than me. Shoulders ahead, a cutout against the street glow. I thought it was a neighbor messing with us or a teenager from the other side of the park. I raised the light and kept my mouth shut. The shape did not move. It did not sway or shift. It stood there, and then I knew it registered me. I can't tell you how I knew. The beam licked the trunk next to it and came back, and in that second I understood it. Knew I was looking. I blinked and breathed and braced my feet. The figure was gone. It did not run or duck. It was there, and then there was only the tree line and the halo of sodium light beyond it. I took one step forward, then stopped. My legs said stop. Behind me, Mason asked what I saw. I kept quiet. My mouth had gone dry. Footsteps ran on the other side of the fence. Not on our side, on the loading dock side where pallets used to sit when trucks came in. Footsteps on dirt and loose gravel. Quick and heavy enough that we all heard them. They went from left to right fast, from the creek side toward the ramp. We couldn't see anything. We heard it go. The chain link rattled once, like something brushed it in the run. I didn't think. Animal. The sound had a cadence I knew from people. Heel and toe. It covered ground in a straight line. It did not break off into brush the way deer do. It ran past us like it had its own plan, and we were standing near it. Mason said someone was back there and wanted to know if I saw him. I said I had seen someone. I didn't describe it. The beam hit the fence and threw glare back into my eyes. I lowered the light and swallowed. We held still and listened. That was the only smart move. The footsteps stopped. The cicadas thinned for a breath and filled in again. I set my knees and tried to quiet my breathing. The skin on my arms felt tight. A sound came from the trees where the figure had been. It wasn't a voice I could place. It wasn't a person I knew. It came out like metal pulled wrong. A long, coarse scrape that cut through the night and filled the spaces between everything else. It was loud and close and wrong. It did not rise and fall like a shout. It dragged across our heads and pressed into our chests. It went on and then it stopped. We ran. No one said to run, no one grabbed anyone. We broke and drove up the path toward the lot. Sticks hit our legs. The flashlight beam shook and slapped the ground. I couldn't keep it steady. The beer can shot into the ditch. Branches raked our arms. The fence held to our left as a straight dark plane. A thin crying sound rode the air, and then I knew it came from me. Not sobbing, just the small pull that slips out when your body wants air more than it wants pride. The path bent up toward the gravel. Our shoes slid on the rocks. I kept the light low. If we fell, a tooth would go. We hit the edge of the lot and spilled into the open between the dumpsters and the propane cage. Cooler air moved over my face. The row of trailers held a steady light. A streetlight hummed over Lot 12. The yellow made it look like we hadn't been gone at all. We didn't talk. We didn't compare. We stood in a loose bunch with sweat at our armpits and dust on our knees and waited to find out if the sound would follow. It didn't. The woods behind us went back to bug noise and the low rush of the creek. A car rolled past the office. A dog barked twice and went quiet. We split without planning it. Mason cut across to his porch. I got the key from the fake rock and let myself into our trailer without slamming the door. The kitchen was dark except for the microwave clock. I turned the flashlight off and set it on the counter. My hands shook long after my feet stopped. I didn't tell my mom. It wasn't about trouble. She would ask for answers. Who was out there? Did we know them? Did they say anything? Did we go past the fence? I didn't have anything she could use. I washed my face in the bathroom sink and looked at my eyes in the mirror. When I went to bed, I left the curtain a little open toward the lot lights. I watched the slice of brightness until my eyes shut. The next day, We did not bring it up. Not at the stop sign. Not waiting for the bus. We kept our words light and about nothing. Mason asked about the $5. I told him I would bring Doritos the next day. It used to be a joke. It was not a joke that day, but we kept the shape of it. In the afternoon, I went back to the top of the path. I stood where the gravel gives over to dirt. The fence looked the same. The oak looked the same. The flat spot held the same patchy weeds. I didn't go down. I didn't shine the light. I listened. The creek moved like it always moves. Leaves rubbed together. I stayed long enough to count it as a visit. Then I went home. That night we sat on Mason's steps and watched the lot kids ride in slow circles. The glow from Broadway laid a dull line across the tops of the trees. The woods red as a wall. We treated it as a wall. We did not go behind it. We kept that rule without talking about it. We stuck to daylight if we had to cut through to the creek and stayed in the open under the porch lights where the trailers look at you. If a ball went into the brush after dark, we let it go. No one teased anyone for caution. No one volunteered to test it. We never used the word scream when we referred to it later, which we almost never did. If we had to say anything, we called it the sound. That held the line. The other word would make it into a story that doesn't help us. We didn't want a story. We wanted the facts we could live with. A thing that happened. A thing that ended. A thing we didn't press on like a bruise. The order sits in me. I looked. It registered me. It vanished. Footsteps ran where I couldn't see them. A rough metal scrape filled the dark. We ran. We hit light. It didn't follow. I keep the steps in that order because anything else is wrong. I still live close to that strip of trees. Knoxville gets into you and stays. Sometimes I park at Food City and walk over to the loading dock for a soda. The fence is still there. The pines are taller. On hot nights, the air holds the same wet weight and the bug noise builds its steady cover. I don't go to the flat spot after dark. I don't test the line. I can reach the creek another way or skip it. That's the boundary I keep. We didn't file a report. We didn't tell a manager. There was nothing to write down that would help anyone. A shape that noticed me. Footsteps without a body. A coarse scrape that emptied us. We ran. We came back into the light. It stopped. That is the edge of it for me, and that is where I leave it. We pitched our tents on the south lawn where the slope runs down to the gravel lane, and the woods start. The house sat behind us in weathered gray stone, square windows catching the morning. I had heard the camp story about a man on the lane, but it sounded like something meant for flashlights and late nights. On the second morning, while we laced boots and shook off dew, a low ground haze held over the grass. I made a quiet decision to test it. I asked for a sign in my head and waited. A white fog lifted from the lane in a tight bloom, thicker than the rest, and disappeared in less than a second. The air stayed cool on my face. The girls beside me kept tying laces and didn't look up. That evening, our coordinator walked out alone to the equipment shed by the lane to lock it for night. When she returned, her steps were quick, and her jaw stayed tight. She changed the plan without details and kept to the porch light after dusk. She would not go back to the shed. She asked another counselor to handle it and watch them from the top step until they came back with the key. On the third evening, I stood at the edge of the lawn, where the grass gives to gravel, and tried to decide whether to go with the group or wait for a bus to the lake. I stayed. A man stood by the lane as if he had stepped out of the space between the posts. He wore dark work trousers, a plain shirt, and a cap I recognized from old photos in town buildings. The clothes looked used, not dressed up. He did not look at me. He was there in clear outline, and then he wasn't. I kept my eyes on the same section of hedge and gravel, and counted breaths. Nothing moved except a single gnat in the warm air. After camp ended, I went to the library to check the folder on the estate that sits in the local history cabinet. The clippings mentioned a groundsman who did not come home after an accident, and notes about sightings at the lane in mornings and some evenings. A hand-drawn family tree showed the original owners, their children, and the man's name written in the margin with a small arrow toward the lane. I traced my own line out of habit and found 2 matching surnames folded several generations back into the same tree. It was not a story someone told me. It sat there in handwriting and certificates. A later session of younger campers used the same lawn and walked the same route. I was not on that trip, but a counselor sent me a message and a marked map. The kids had come back talking over each other about a man at the stones by the lane. They pointed to the spot where I had stood. Their description matched the clothes. The coordinator kept to the porch again and did not send kids to the shed at dusk. The lane sat clean and quiet when they checked it in daylight, and no one offered an explanation. I do not know if the quick bloom of fog answered me because I asked, or if the asking only set my attention to the right place. I did see the figure. The younger kids said they did too, and they did not know me. We were at different times of day and on different days, and we pointed to the same stretch of gravel. Later, the paper trail made a narrow line between my family and the house's first one. The line did not explain anything, but it gave the sightings a place to land. The lane still runs along the woods, and the shed still sits back from it with a stiff lock. I pass both in full daylight now, and keep my eyes level on the posts until I am past them, and I do not ask for anything out loud anymore.